Whenever I've got in a down mood, or I've been with others who've been in a down mood, I often go back to, why do I actually believe what I believe? And what is it? What is the proof for what I believe? Am I just deluded? Because when 7 billion people believe something totally different to you, sometimes you can feel very alone, and that, well, maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe everyone else is just right. So, what I hope to give you today is a very sort of cut down version of why I believe in God, and a lot of the different aspects of proof for why I believe that we are worshipping the right God. Now, a lot of skeptical people will hear a lot of these proofs, and probably there's always a way out for any proof you give. But I believe to any mind that is willing to be reasonable and take reasonable evidence, these proofs will be persuasive like they were for me. Now, if we read Luke 16:31, this was also from the Sabbath school lesson, and it was interesting because I was really trying to find this quote and I couldn't find it, and it was in the Sabbath school lesson, so that was handy. So here it was. It's Luke 16:31, and he said unto him, if they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. So, at the end of the day, some people evidence is just not going to persuade. Doesn't matter how perfect the evidence, people sometimes just have their mind made up and they don't want to know. Because either the implications are too great, or many other reasons. The brainwashing is too strong. There's so many different reasons. But I'll start with a few sections of proof. Now, one section of proof that really is, I find convincing, is prophecy. And I'll go through a few prophecies that I find very compelling. Now, the first one is in Psalm 22. Now, if we go through this one, I'll just sort of skip through it to the bits that are very obvious, because you could do a whole sermon on each one of these prophecies because they're so amazing. But I'm trying to squeeze as much in as possible. But this first one is in Psalm 22. If you can try and follow along, I'm skipping through a bit. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me, and from my words of my roaring? But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men, and despised of the people. All they that see me laugh at me to scorn. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head, saying, he trusted on the Lord, that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted in the midst of my bowels. My strength is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue cleaveth to my jaws, and thou hast brought me into the dust of death. They part my garments among them, and cast lots upon my vesture. Now that would be pretty much word for word what happened in the Gospels. The problem is that was written down around at least 600 years beforehand and confirmed in the Dead Sea Scrolls to be at least 400 years old at the time of Christ. Sorry. So it's such a powerful thing. It's almost horrible to use it as a proof, because it's words of Christ. That's what he was going through on the cross for us. And how could Christ possibly control all those factors? He could control some of them, but at the end of the day, it's totally out of his control, unless he was God, which he was. Next is Isaiah 53, which is the same story, the same basic thing. If we go from Isaiah 53, 2 to 9, it says, "For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that shall desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs, and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed." So we all know, I think, quite intimately the story of what happened to Christ and how that is unmistakably what happened to Christ. Before a lot of these methods actually were even invented, this was written down. So I'll keep going in that. "And we all like sheep are gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. And the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb for the slaughter, and as sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth." So you can see why the disciples who saw Christ were willing, after they were pointed out these prophecies, they were willing to be hung upside down on a cross. They were willing to be beaten and killed and fed to lions later on, not the disciples necessarily, but the people after that, because they were so compelled by these prophecies that there is no other possible way. Only God could do something like that. Only God could write the future that way. There's another prophecy that I find incredibly compelling, and it's in Ezekiel 26 verses 3 to 5. So that's Ezekiel 26 verses 3 to 5. Now keep in mind, this was written 22 years, in the 22-year period between 593 BC and 571 BC. So that's Ezekiel 26, 3 to 5. It says, "Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Tyre," which is the other pronunciation of Tyre, the city of Tyre, "and will cause many nations to come up against thee, and as the sea causes his waves to come up. And they shall destroy the walls of Tyre, and break down her towers, and I will also scrape her dust from her, and make her top like the top of a rock. It shall be a place for the spreading of nets in the midst of the sea, for I have spoken it, saith the Lord. And it shall become a spoil to the nations." So this prophecy to me is an incredible one. It's so detailed. If you go to the land of modern day Tyre, I'll actually just read from the history books, because they pretty much just say what I just read, except in a history book. So I'll just read what actually happened. After the destruction of Jerusalem and the carrying away of her king Zedekiah into captivity, Nebuchadnezzar took all Palestine and Syria and the cities on the sea coast, including Tyre, which fell after a siege of 13 years. The inhabitants of Tyre fled to a rocky island half a mile offshore. The walls on the landward side of the island were 150 feet high. The channel between Tyre and the mainland was over 20 feet deep and frequently lashed by violent southwest winds. Their fortifications, they believed, would resist the strongest battering ram yet devised. The city walls stood above the sea. How could any army without ships scale them? Shore-based artillery was useless at such a range. So basically the city was taken by Nebuchadnezzar and destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. It was laid waste, and then it laid there. The ruins laid there. So the prophecy that says, "I will scrape thee, the dust from her, and make the top of a rock," that wasn't fulfilled yet. But later, Alexander the Great came along, and he had a problem with Tyre. And the problem was he couldn't get through to Tyre. They'd set up the new Tyre. The old Tyre was dead, and this is the one that was prophesied. The new Tyre had moved to an island, and there were spikes all the way through the water, and there was no way for ships to get through. There was no way for anyone to get through. So Alexander the Great did the only thing he could do, and he scraped the dust and the ruins of Tyre and dumped them in the ocean. And he created a causeway all the way to Tyre. And that causeway is there today still. And they cast nets off that causeway. You can go there, take photos of people still casting nets off the causeway. It's still there. And I wish I had a thing to show you the pictures, but they're there, and it's still happening today. So I'll read it from, this is just Wikipedia. The siege of Tyre was a siege of the city of Tyre, a strategic coastal base on the Mediterranean orchestrated by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. During his campaign against the Persians, the Macedonian army was unable to capture the city through conventional means because it was an island and had walls right up to the sea. Alexander responded to the problem by first blockading and besieging Tyre for several months, and then by building a causeway that allowed him to breach the fortification. So it's interesting how God says, often people think prophecy is a prediction, but it's actually not a prediction. If we read that, if we go back to that Isaiah quote, I'll read it, just the end bit again, and it says, not Isaiah, sorry, the Ezekiel quote, the same one. So it shall be a place for the spreading of nets in the midst of the sea, for I have spoken it. So if God speaks something, it doesn't matter who says or does anything, it's going to happen. And yeah, there are many prophecies that people try and go against, and every time, for example, the rebuilding of Babylon was attempted by Saddam Hussein just recently. And the Americans went in there and killed him for whatever reason, and that prophecy was destroyed. God used the Americans for whatever reason. Like, it's not saying they're working for God or anything, it's just that prophecy cannot not be fulfilled. It has to be fulfilled because God said it. So Babylon could never be rebuilt, which was another prophecy, but I won't go into it. There's just so many. Now, there's other prophecies for the end time. Like, there are many prophecies of the end time that I wanted to go into, but again, you could do a 10-hour sermon and everyone would fall asleep. But I'll go through the ones that are just completely without dispute, that we look at them and just go, well, no one could debate it. So 2 Peter 3:3-7. Now, people don't often think of these as prophetic books, but they are most certainly prophecy, and very clear prophecy. So this is talking about the last days, and it says, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers. Has that happened yet? Yeah, okay. Walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? Do you hear that very often? Oh, it's, our parents said he'd come. Their parents said they come. No, it never happened. He's not going to come. It'll be years down the track, thousands of years. For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they are willingly ignorant. Dumb on purpose, yeah. That by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished, so that there was a flood. So it says that a lot of the Christian church will believe that there wasn't a flood. 97% of Christians, people who claim to be Christians, don't believe in Genesis as a literal book of history. It's pretty scary. And that's an amazing fulfillment of prophecy. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire, the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. So he's got a few prophecies right. We don't know about that one yet. We haven't proved that one, but I'm sure it'll come true. Yeah. 2 Timothy gives another fairly similar kind of prophecy, but this is more specifically relating to the church, and it's more detailed to the behaviour of professed Christians. Now, it's important we notice that this is talking about professed Christians. This is 2 Timothy 3:1-5. Now, if this was worldlings, that would be quite normal. But this is talking about professed Christians. It says, this know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers. Do you know a lot of Christians use God's name as an expletive, and they don't even see a problem with it. Now, that's one form of blasphemy. But the other form of blasphemy is actually the more insidious one and the more dangerous one, which is putting yourself in the place of God. In other words, the whole satanic philosophy of do what thou wilt, saying the law is nailed to the cross. Have you heard that? The law is done away with. So therefore, whose law are we following? The law of our heart. Follow your heart. Whereas the Bible says the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. So blasphemers, the idea of blasphemy is putting yourself in the place of God. In other words, making you a judge of the law and the Bible. And if you look at all the Christian churches today, most of them claim that the Bible's done away, the law is done away with, so they can pick whatever day we want to worship. We can worship on Sunday. We choose. Is that blasphemy? Of course it's blasphemy, because you're saying, I choose the law. God won't mind. No, it was only a piece of fruit. Why would God mind? Or it's only a little thing. It's only the Sabbath. It's It's only a day. That's putting ourselves in the place of God. So that's blasphemy. So blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection. Now, before I go back to that, I'm going to go back to unthankful. We in the West are the most horribly unthankful people. So many people, the fact that any of us can be even remotely sad ever is a testament to how unthankful we are. We have all the facilities in the world. We have all access to food, all access to water. That's the one thing I noticed in Papua New Guinea. The people there are happier than we are, yet they have so much less. They are on the edge all their life. They could die tomorrow. Like you go into a village, every day there's someone either died or in the process of dying. Yet and these are young people, these aren't old people who've had their life. So we are the most unthankful people that have ever lived, and we've had it the easiest of anyone. We are so complacent, especially in Australia. We've never seen a war. We've lived in a time of peace, particularly our generation. Obviously, the older generations have been through the wars, but on our soil, we've never really seen a proper war, and we take it all for granted, and that is unthankful. Unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, and that doesn't mean you can't hold your bladder, that means you can't control yourself. How many people have you said, I can't control this sin, or I can't stop doing this sin? You're essentially saying you're fulfilling prophecy by being incontinent. So it's good that you say it because you're fulfilling prophecy, but learn from it. We need to learn from the Bible. So incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good. If you've ever talked to people who don't keep the Sabbath, they hate you for keeping the Sabbath or even bringing it up. We had a talk about this before. Traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. So it's not that we don't love God, not that people don't love God, it's just that we love pleasure just that bit more. And that applies to so many things, but this is a whole new sermon if I keep going down that line. So, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. And at the end of the day, that's all of us, even if we don't actually see it. We're all like that. And we need to turn away from ourselves. We need to die to self. So I think we can all agree that prophecy is very much being fulfilled in the church, if not in us individually. There's another prophecy in Isaiah that talks about women disregarding the principles of modesty. Now, it ends on Isaiah 4:1, but if we go back a bit further, we get a little bit of context of what they're talking about, because this is both a literal prophecy and it has another spiritual application as well. It says, moreover, the Lord saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty. So this is Isaiah 3:16. Moreover, the Lord saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and making a tinkling with their feet. And so on. It goes on down to speak about all the jewelry they wore and all the adornment and all these different things. And then Isaiah 4:1, which is the next chapter, says, and in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by thy name to take away our reproach. So it says there'll be a bunch of Christians who will do whatever they want, and they'll still want to be called Christians just so they feel better about themselves and people look on them well. Has that happened? I don't think there's any room for debate on that one. Okay. So another prophecy is one that I've been dealing with Paul for a year, and I had no idea how much was in this prophecy, and that's the statue, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, the depths of that prophecy I couldn't hope to even fathom or go into at this point, but I ask you, if you want to learn more about the prophetic proofs for the Bible, there's the book Daniel and Revelation. And also, if you go to godslastwarning.com, there's a book called Prophecy Speaks. It goes into great detail on this, and that's an audio book. And eventually we'll bring out this thing so you can see the whole of Daniel 2 in, amazing detail. So that should be released soon, hopefully. We need your prayers for that one. Okay. So, advertising aside, the next one is the fossil record. People take the fossil record and say, how do you believe in evolution? Why do you believe in evolution? Oh, the fossil record. Yeah, but why? Oh, the fossil record. Because the scientists say the fossil record is a good proof for evolution. But it's actually a horrible proof for evolution and a very brilliant proof of the flood. Because if you look at the fossil record, down the bottom, you have the coelacanths, you have the trilobites, you have the bottom-dwelling creatures. They're the ones at the bottom of the ocean. And gradually you go up and up and up and up. And right up the top, you have the creatures who are smart enough to run away from a flood. And they run higher. So they get buried last. And then the birds, they're flying. They're not going to get buried until right at the last minute. And you find them there in the fossil record. So you see, if you read the fossil record correctly, it is actually a brilliant proof of the flood. And in reality, fossils can't actually form any other way than a flood. Because we have sheep on our farm, and I don't know if any of you have seen the sheep when they die. They die frequently, sadly, because that's just what sheep do, it seems. But when they die, their bones are there, and if you leave them there, you don't see dirt piling on them slowly. It doesn't pile. It doesn't even appear. And eventually their bones are scattered. They break apart. They're eaten. They break down, and they're gone. And that's it. Where's the fossil? No fossil. It doesn't happen. The only time you can get a fossil is in a massive flood or a catastrophe. It doesn't have to be a worldwide flood. There have been fossils formed in localized massive floods. They form landslides, all these different kind of things, absolutely. But if you look at for example, the Cretaceous, which is the chalk layer that goes around the whole Earth, there's a layer of chalk that goes on every continent on the Earth. And it's very thick in some areas. I'm not going to give the exact numbers because it varies from whichever source you read. So it's very big. The White Cliffs of Dover, if you've seen them, the big white cliffs, they are Cretaceous. They're the chalk layer formed. Okay, now chalk is formed by microscopic creatures, sea creatures, who die and fall to the bottom. At the current rate, if all things were uniform, everything was the same, the current rate, they do about an inch every year. And if you work all that out, it works out there's like a million years or something. It's some large amount. But the problem is, there is a chalk layer covering the whole Earth. So that means the whole earth had to have been covered by water for a period of time. So when would that have been, do you suspect? And if the earth was covered by water at one period of time, that means the fossil record is actually irrelevant, because a flood where you have 250 meter tides, because they're not protected by continents, you have all sorts of things ripping. Like if you've ever seen just a localized flood, the amount of dirt that is shifted is incredible. Whole cities have been buried by these floods. So that's a localized little tiny flood. But a flood that would create that chalk layer, which is there as perfect evidence, means the earth was covered entirely with water for a period of time, and that's the flood. So therefore, all the other layers would have been formed around that time. If there was a flood of that size, there would have been other layers formed, and therefore, that's a perfect proof for the flood. So there's obviously a lot more detail to that, but the chalk layer is an incredible proof for it. Now, you say an inch per year, all these different things. Now, if the flood happened, you would get rain, lots of rain would produce the flood. So the waters would be warmed up by that rain, because rain, the changing from a gas to a liquid, releases heat. So the whole area would have heated up, and that water would have heated up. So what happens when you get hot water with lots of nutrients all over the earth? You get a massive algal bloom, and all these sea creatures, these microscopic sea creatures, would explode in population massively. And so probably halfway through the flood, you would have seen huge outbursts of these creatures, and they would have eaten all this stuff, and then it would have dropped to the ground, and then you've got the Cretaceous level, that chalk layer. And then after that, more things happened in the flood. The winds blew and dried the land and pushed all the rocks around and then covered those layers, which is exactly what the Bible says and exactly what you would expect from that. So to me, the fossil record is very strong evidence of a flood. Okay, totally different topic now is the micro machines in our body. I know Michael and a few others have been very convinced by this evidence, and this was very solid for me. If you see the micro machines that exist in our body. Now, the one I love the most is ATP synthase, simply because it has to be in every living thing. You cannot live without that actual complex. Now, what it is, ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Your cells run off phosphates. So if one of these micro machines wants to do something, it takes one of those phosphates off there, so it makes adenosine diphosphate instead of triphosphate. So it takes one of these, does that, and that machine will do an action. So these are little machines inside the human body and the cells, all cells. So you need ATP simply to have a machine, or this machine working, or any machine, even a protozoa, even the most microscopic organisms have ATP in them. That's how they run. So ATP, if you think of it, rather than thinking of that, it's fuel. It's the fuel for the car. It's the fuel. So that's what it basically is. Now, this complex is a series of, there's like 5 different things. I'd look it up online if you have a chance, but I'll try and basically explain it. That basically splits water and then creates a gradient of hydrogen and not, and that runs this little motor that synthesizes ATP. Now, if that synthesizer of ATP wasn't there, it would literally take, I heard estimates of up to 10 trillion years for every ATP molecule to form. If this ATP synthase wasn't there, it would take 10 trillion years for that to form. So, while you're waiting for one cellular action to happen, you've got to wait 10 trillion years. Not a lot of anything's going to happen there. So basically, no life can exist without this. And so it all had to be there for anything to evolve. And to me, actually saying that that complex evolved is so beyond ridiculous. I struggle to take it seriously. But anyway, caffeine. So what ATP does in the body basically is, if you see a person, I know when a person dies, rigor mortis sets in, when they go hard, when they go solid and won't move. That is when the ATP is run out in your body. It just stops, and your cells lose, all movement is stopped. So you can see how vital it is for life. Obviously, without it, we've got nothing. And the same could be, again, this is a whole nother, you could do a series of sermons and be here for days on the complexity of human life and just the human body, all living cells. And that's why in Romans it says this. It's Romans 1:20. It's Romans 1:20. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. So we have absolutely no excuse not to believe, simply because of the invisible things that we're made of. And there's other proofs. For example, the fine-tuning of the universe. I'm not going to go into detail on that, but basically, if for example, the weak nuclear force was out by a very small percentage, 2%, then we could only ever have helium. So, you're not going to get much out of that. So, even the laws of physics are so incredibly well designed. There's someone did a list of them. There's many constants that if they were moved even slightly, it would change everything. Nothing could exist. So this is why you hear of all these different things, theories like parallel universes and things like that, because their claim is that you have to have, if there's an infinite number of universes, then one has to work. So in order to deal with infinitely low probabilities, they have to generate infinite universes. So you can see they're desperate to come up with an idea because they know this is irrefutable, basically. And they don't like the consequences. The next one was fairly recent discovery, was blood in dinosaur bones. Now, if we look, Mary Schweitzer in 2005 was on a dig and she sawed, they couldn't fit this bone into a chopper because it was so big. It was a T-Rex bone. They sawed it in half and it really stank really badly. Now this is supposed to be 75 million years old according to the scientific approach, and they got it on there, they took it back to the lab and they actually found hemoglobin and all these different, the soft tissue, all this stuff in the bones. And they themselves say that tissue could never last for more than 100,000 years, just because it would decay naturally. Eventually, after testing it 21 times, she believed it. So there's no bias there, is there? No, of course there is. Massive bias. So So what happened as a result of this research? Another group of people, now these are all atheists, one of the leaders of a skeptic organisation that tries to stop creationism being taught in schools, she came out recently and said, yeah, well, it's true. It's amazing that there's soft tissue in dinosaur bones. We don't know how this could possibly happen. Well, I do. It's because there was a flood and the dinosaurs got buried about 4,500 years ago and it's still there. But they don't know. But because of that, a group of atheist scientists came out and they went to all these different dig sites and they got bones, and they thought, well, if there's soft tissue, let's date them. Let's see, carbon date them. And they couldn't go to a lab and say, let's carbon date that, because the labs they automatically say, no, well, they're 75 million years old, we're not going to waste the money. We won't waste the time. And it's, since the 1800s, it's been like that. They've said dinosaurs are 75 million years old because of this chart we made, that Lyell made about the geologic column. Therefore, they couldn't possibly be carbon dated because you can only carbon date up to 60,000 years. So anyway, these guys just put them into the lab and said they were bones, and they came back ages between 22,000 and 40,000 years old. Now that seems a bit off for our belief system until you actually understand how carbon dating works. Basically, carbon dating, when I'm living, I'm taking in carbon-14 as well as carbon-12. The ratio is roughly 1,000,000 to 1. So you're taking it in, and over time that decays in your body. Sorry, when you die, you're at equilibrium. You have the same ratio as the atmosphere. But when you die, you stop taking any in. So the ratio gradually shifts because your carbon-14 decays back to nitrogen. So they measure how much is there. Now, the carbon-14 dating is actually quite accurate whenever the atmosphere is the same. And the pre-flood world was entirely different to us. People lived 900 years. Dinosaurs were so much bigger than the animals we have today. Everything was totally different. And this can be explained a number of ways, but clearly there was less harmful radiation coming in, and the harmful radiation, the stuff that hurts us, also creates the carbon-14 in the atmosphere by striking nitrogen atoms and turning them into carbon-14. So naturally the ratio, if it was near zero back then, and a dinosaur got buried with near zero carbon-14, decays for 4,000 years, and then it's got 22,000 years or 40,000 years worth of carbon-14 left. So it makes perfect sense with what we believe. Sorry if that didn't make sense, but I'll just keep going. Another one that I find incredible, and it's been highlighted really recently with the finding out of how easy it is to become zinc deficient and things like this, is the level of refinement that how accurate our body has to be to keep us in a state of health. Now, what we're doing as a machine is we're dumping in a lot of elements into our body in random kind of forms. They're not random because God created that as well, but in forms that go into our body, get mushed up, digested by acid, and then somehow our body, all these cells, manage to take out the nutrients they need and get rid of all the ones they don't. and to finally balance, like the thyroid, for example. If your thyroid is out by just micrograms, if it's releasing not enough of a particular chemical, you can be either lethargic all the time, or the opposite. If you get, you can be completely psychotic. Like it can make you mad. And these are just fine little details. Just trying to imagine that evolving to get to that point. You'd think humans would have killed themselves out before they got a chance to evolve. It's such a finely tuned thing. Only a designer could come up with it and sustain it. And the other side of that is the fact that we can throw in McDonald's and we can throw in all this stuff and we can still survive for 40 years quite unharmed. Like, that is an incredible testament to the Creator. That, just imagine if we got a car and said, I'm going to put sugar in you and you're going to run for 40 years. Put it in, gone, nothing. But we do that to our system. Well, I try not to now, but for many years I did put garbage into my system that shouldn't have been there, and your body survived. God sustains us. It's incredible. It's an incredible machine that, we think, oh, we're so amazing. We created a computer. It's like, well, did you create a computer that could create itself and reproduce other computers and oh no, but that could have evolved through processes. It's like 1,000 billion times more complex than a computer. It's insane. But again, a lot of people can't be convinced on that one, but for me that is a very, very compelling proof. The Bible itself, to me, is also another amazing proof. To find 40 people to write a book on philosophy and science and all these different things that the Bible covers, and they all agree. Over 2,500 years, I believe 6,000, but there's variations from 2,500 years to beyond. So however long it was written over, it's at least 2,500 years. So these people, completely different cultures, completely different areas, completely different upbringing, and they all have the same opinion on all these fine details of subjects. Go to a university and see if you can find two people who agree on all aspects of philosophy, and, well, you've found a miracle, because it just doesn't happen. There's always disagreement. And that's why in science it's very hard to lay down solid figures about dates and all these different things, because they all disagree. There's no agreement. You think, oh, the Earth is definitely 4.5 billion years old, and or all this, and then this group says, no, it's this, and no, it's this, and then, yeah, no one agrees on anything. The consensus doesn't actually exist. It's only put there to make the sheep get in line. Or maybe goats, I'm not sure. The other part of it is how the Bible was actually maintained for all that time in an organisation, the papacy, which was so violently opposed to it. And not only that, prophesied by it as being the Antichrist power. They kept that book alive. You've got people saying, like bishops of the Catholic Church saying, if we aren't the Antichrist power, then it's an awfully large coincidence that we look so much like her. And this is Catholic priests. There's quotes like this from Catholic priests, and they kept hold of the Bible. They actually kept it. So people later could go into the archives and take it. Only God could manage that kind of of a miracle, keeping people who are opposed to something, keeping his word alive through that. And not only that, giving us nice little proofs along the way so we could trust, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in Qumran in the 40s. They were found in a time where skepticism was just taking hold of everyone. And you go back, and they showed that, well, Isaiah was around before Jesus. So that Isaiah 53 prophecy we talked about, that was definitely before Jesus, only because we know that now for a fact, because of God preserving his word in a place that no one could tamper with it. I just praise the Lord for his giving us, we are all doubting Thomases now, giving us enough proof for us as doubting Thomases to actually have a faith that we can, being able to trust in the Bible. And yeah, there was a lot of other things too, but there was another thing with the New Testament. Even there was a big line of philosophy that was saying that in about 330 AD at the Council of Nicaea, it was around there 332 or something, I can't remember exactly, but that was when the Bible was formed or written, or like all these philosophers were saying all this stuff, until there was a cave found that had a manuscript in it. Had fragments in it. Some of them, there was one of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, a fragment of the Gospel of Mark in codex form from before 60 AD. So we're talking that Gospel had to have been written down a long time before that fragment was, because that's in a book form. It had to have been written down almost immediately after the events. But there's a lot of different proofs on that. But basically you could form the entire New Testament, bar a few texts, none of them which are in dispute. You could form the whole New Testament from quotes from brothers in the church to each other, including John 1:1. There's quotes between different people in the church, and they've quoted from the Bible and send it in encouraging letters to each other. And you can assemble a whole Bible from that, all from pre-200 AD. So all the philosophy, God just went, sorry, I don't want that. Kill that. Kill all their pomp and theories that the Bible is wrong. And I love how God just gives you enough. He won't ever remove all shadow of doubt, but enough for a reasonable person to believe. Humans, to me, are also another very good proof. If you look at the animal kingdom, humans are actually quite unique. Now you think, monkeys sort of look like humans, or apes. But you'll find they are very, very different in many, many ways. But we'll look at, for example, if you look at a kangaroo, for example, if you look at a kangaroo, there are actually many species that are pretty much identical to them in a lot of ways. They're just sort of big rats, and there's little versions of kangaroos, wallabies, and then there's other ones. Whereas humans, we're very unique in our intelligence, our capacity to understand things, our reasoning ability, our thinking ahead, all these different things. Now, obviously, we can act just like animals, and actually worse than animals, but a human being using his mind correctly can do amazing things that no animal has even come close to. You see little glimpses of it, like a beaver building a dam and different things like that, and you think, wow, that's very human-like, that's very intelligent. But when you compare it to building a huge skyscraper and broadacre farming and all these different things that allow billions of humans to exist, they're in a total category of their own. And for me, that seems quite unreasonable for that to actually evolve separately, that there wouldn't be other types of, like, example, a kangaroo that speaks or something like that. Like, why doesn't that exist? A different type of, all these different creatures that could exist, but they don't, because evolution actually didn't happen. We were created in the image of God. And God made a lot of these things like monkeys because they're cute and they look nice and they're fun to look at, not because we were made from them. Okay. Now, probably one of the stronger ones for me is my personal experience, how I've seen God lead my life, and how he has used such negative circumstances to my benefit. Now, this kind of thing, I believe everyone has their own story in this, and if you look back on your life, you'll see so many little events that if they had have gone differently, you wouldn't be here, you wouldn't know the truth. And I can see how God used, for example, I was in a rock band, all of you know that, I believe, but and God actually led me into that rock band. Not because the rock band was correct. It was his permissive will. But he led me into that, and if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have met my wife. And I probably never would have come into this truth, because Leah met people on the internet, and then we came into the truth via that. So all these little things, these little leadings, that if it had gone any other way, we may have been lost. And I'm sure there's a long way to go in ahead, but I just praise the Lord that he watches over us in such a strong way. And so personal experience for me, I won't go into too much detail, because for each individual, personal experience doesn't provide a lot of evidence for others. But for yourself, man, if someone came up to me and said, what if Jesus didn't exist? Even if I didn't have all the other evidence, I think I'd still have to say I believe, because I don't understand. It can't be explained any other way, a lot of the things in my life, to me. So personal experience is very strong evidence. But for me, being a very analytical and doubting Thomas kind of person, the proofs are very helpful. And I thank God that he's very merciful to me and willing, just like he was with Thomas, to say, here's the proof, even though we don't deserve it. But for me, by far the greatest proof of God, and that the God of the Bible is the true God, is Christ. I'll read this thing from C.S. Lewis, and I really like this. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of stuff he does and says, but I believe this is a very, very clear and good statement. It says, this is from Mere Christianity. It says, yet, and this is the strange, significant thing, even his enemies, when they read the Gospels, do not usually get the impression of silliness or conceit. Still less do unprejudiced readers. Christ says that he is humble and meek, and we believe him, not noticing that if he were merely a man, humility and meekness are the very last characteristics we could attribute to someone of his sayings. I am trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I am ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, and I don't accept his claims but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was, as he is, and is, the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. So Christ's character, to a lot of people, is incredible. It's an amazing thing. And for me, the epitome of this, there's two places that really hit hard home for me, and we can all learn from, me particularly. If we read in Luke 23:33. And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, they crucified him, and the malefactors, one on his right hand and the other on his left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiments and cast lots. There is not a single human being alive without the power of God that could do that. It's not possible after what he's been through. He was beaten, falsely accused, and taken up in front of all these people that he knew, naked. And he said he didn't hate them. What he said couldn't have come as a manufactured thing. You can't manufacture that, because every part of him would be screaming out. So, to me, his character is the greatest proof for God, because to be able to do that is amazing. And then the final one is when he was on the cross and dying and beaten and naked in front of all his friends and family and all these people. He took the time to comfort a person who was a thief. He wasn't thinking of himself. He was thinking, I'll see you in heaven. Don't worry. What a character. How could you not believe in that? It's amazing. No one could manufacture that theory. So, I don't suspect that will prove the greatest skeptics or anything, but for me that is some of what has convinced me over the years to trust God and to take him as my Lord and Saviour. And I hope some of that maybe struck a note with you and can help you on your walk too. Amen.